Protest talking about how wonderful it had been. At that time they started protesting here just outside the gates, and there has the confrontation as we are now.
David, can you tell us what brought this on?
Well, it's been a protest that's been planned obviously for some time, as we know. It's been something that people have been talking about, protesting against the keeping of detainees in Woomera, talking about Australia's Indigenous policies, about its immigration policy, nuclear policy, things like that. But tonight was something that they just wanted to show their civil disobedience. It was sparked a little bit by a success in some skirmishes with APS guards last night, so that may well have sparked their enthusiasm and their confidence today to go ahead with this protest.
Thank you, David. David Curnow reporting live from Woomera. And earlier, David filed this report from Woomera as the protesters continue to swell today. Before the break-in this evening, demonstrations had been relatively peaceful. Last night, however, there were scuffles when Commonwealth Guards tried to move protesters to a different campsite.
It didn't take long for protesters to make their presence felt outside the detention centre. Australian Protective Services guards monitored the action but made no move to stop it. The cries didn't go unnoticed, with dozens of detainees responding to the group's presence. The demonstrations were bolstered by busloads of supporters arriving throughout the day. By mid-afternoon, a protective wall of vehicles surrounded a tent city holding up to 700 people. Late last night, as a group of more than 75 protesters was sleeping in cars near the centre, around 15 APS officers arrived and ordered the group to move.
Yeah, if you don't comply with my direction, I will arrest you. Do you understand that?
What, right now?
I will arrest you right now, sir. Do you understand?
But the group wouldn't budge.
Sorry, mate, you're under arrest. Okay.
Outnumbered, the APS rapidly lost control of the situation, with a number of scuffles breaking out as the officers tried to make arrests.
Lost control! Lost control!
Unable to control the demonstrators, the APS turned their attention to the media.
And you to leave the area now, sir. Excuse me, sir. Do you reckon you leave the area now?
The federal security officers had little option but to retreat empty-handed.
Yeah, they tried to break my finger, and a few other people have injuries. I'm mainly more concerned that they're going to attack us again shortly.
A South Australian police patrol arrived after the melee but showed no sign of helping their federal counterparts.
Simply because they might ask us to provide support. It is our call as to what we do and what we don't do. We are not dictated to by them.
The local area administrator has told protesters they can't camp here. With that order ignored, police must now either use force to remove them or concentrate on what other civil disobedience may lie ahead. David Curnow, ABC News, Woomera.
The state government has threatened to withdraw police, health and education services from the Woomera Detention Centre. Premier Mike Rann says it's costing too much to provide the services and substantial federal compensation must be forthcoming.
As another busload of student demonstrators set off this morning for Woomera, the state government was staging a protest of its own. The Premier says that without a great deal more Commonwealth help, he'll consider withdrawing police, health and education services for the asylum seekers. South Australian taxpayers will spend $6 million on these services this financial year.
If we don't get a better attitude from the federal government, we're going to have to take that hard decision about whether or not we're going to provide the resources.
The burden on South Australian taxpayers is set to rise because state government agencies believe the Baxter Detention Centre at Port Augusta will open in June.
That's going to shift even more costs, more diversion of police and health resources, particularly in an area where, of course, they're already stretched.
The 30 Adelaide University students setting off today hope the demonstration will be as big as the anti-Vietnam protests of the 1970s.
The deception that the government has given to the Australian public that these desperate people are not desperate and they're simply attention seekers is absolutely disgusting, and it's their way of covering up what is going on.
While Woomera is their focus, the protest will also cover uranium mining, missile testing and the dumping of radioactive waste.
The main reason is to bring attention to these sort of blights on the landscape, which if put, in the leafy green suburbs of Norwood, people would be out in their thousands trying to stop it.
The students will offer flowers to police and fresh food for the Woomera detainees. Jeremy Boylan, ABC News, Adelaide.
From the Woomera Detention Centre tonight after protesters stormed the compound and tore down a perimeter fence. Several police, security officers, detainees and demonstrators were injured in the melee. Detainees were also involved in a disturbance inside the centre. The federal government has called the action of the protesters inexcusable and is sending in reinforcements to beef up security. Our first report tonight from David Curnow at Woomera.
Several hundred demonstrators marched again today, pushing straight over the front barricade and into the entrance of the detention centre. But too many factions reduced the crowd's focus.
We can discuss this.
While some ventured to the main fence, a strong police showing deterred the majority from going closer than a few hundred metres. It was a different scene last night, where up to 1,000 people marched straight across the desert to perimeter fencing. With no police to stop them, they surged over the razor wire and up to fences where detainees were waiting.
Our government doesn't listen. Thank you.
Asylum seekers broke through from the inside into the welcoming arms of the crowd. Police were unable to prevent up to 50 detainees escaping in the confusion. Protesters hid many of the escapees in their nearby campsites. While some gave themselves up, others spoke of their desire never to return to the centre.
I cannot go back in camp. If officer kill me, police kill me, good, but don't send me in camp.
By late this afternoon, police had recaptured 37 escapees, including 2 who got as far as Port Augusta, 170 kilometres away. The government says around 10 are still missing. Immigration Minister Philip Ruddock described last night's actions as disturbing. He's accused protesters of various offences, including trespassing on Commonwealth property, breaking down fences, assisting escapes and giving detainees bolt cutters.
I think behaviour of that sort is inexcusable.
Police today also blamed demonstrators for officers being injured in the melee.
When our officers did intervene, they were attacked, they were assaulted, they were struck with crude weapons that the protesters were carrying.
The government says an inquiry is now underway into how last night's breaches occurred. But the Minister has already indicated he thinks security forces should have acted sooner.
It would have been obviously preferable if for operational reasons they'd seen fit to intervene earlier when the first breaches of the fencing occurred. That may well have kept protesters away from the fences.
Protest leaders say they're happy with the outcome last night and are planning further action. Meanwhile, more police have been sent to the area. David Curnow, ABC News, Woomera.
For the latest, we cross now to David outside Woomera Detention Centre. David, have there been any new developments?
Not really, Catherine. At this stage, there's no word on whether any more detainees have been recaptured. It's still believed about 10 are outstanding and missing. It's believed they are somewhere inside the campsite nearby here. Now, the protesters are going through a bit of a debriefing session at the moment just to talk about the past 48 hours. Most of them believe they have had the best of the exchanges in that time, although there are a number of different groups within the protesters that will discuss their options. Now, I can tell you, however, a small group have gathered outside the Woomera police station. About 50 people are there. There's a bit of singing, a bit of dancing going on. Quite a carnival atmosphere actually down there. Very different from the past couple of days. Other than that, though, it's all quiet. Catherine.
Thanks, David Curnow at Woomera. The riot at Woomera only appears to have strengthened the resolve of the federal government. Justice Minister Chris Ellison says the protesters are sadly mistaken if they think their actions will sway the government's stand on mandatory detention for asylum seekers.
The violence at Woomera has the federal government talking tough.
The actions of the protesters are condemned by the government. These actions will not be tolerated and do nothing to advance the cause that they stand for.
But critics have again demanded a rethink of Australia's mandatory detention policy.
Well, the protests, I think, are a symbol of the fact that this minister has refused to listen to people for so many years.
The federal opposition wants Woomera mothballed immediately.
The facility is not adequate to meet the needs of people who have been held for that long term. It's a very harsh environment, it's a harsh climate.
But the Minister for Immigration, Philip Ruddock, maintains that the majority of those still in detention are not genuine refugees.
The bulk of detention population in Australia today are not refugees. They are, in the main, people who have, if they've put claims forward, exhausted every form of review and appeal and are being held for removal.
Mr Ruddock says there will be an extra 1,600 places for refugees from the Middle East and Africa, but refugee advocacy groups say that's not enough to solve the problem. In the meantime, Canberra is sending Australian Federal Police to Woomera to back up South Australian forces and private security officers at the scene. Joanna Ball, ABC News.
Centre. Up to 50 detainees, cheered on by hundreds of demonstrators, fled the compound in the confusion. 37, including 3 young children, have been recaptured and charged, along with 20 of the protesters.
As protesters stormed the Woomera Detention Centre, detainees saw their chance at freedom. Without warning, the demonstration had become a mass escape. Close to 1,000 protesters raided the centre last night, tearing down an outer fence and flooding inside. Freedom! 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 Detainees scaled razor wire to reach the protesters. They joined hands through the final barrier, a young asylum seeker overcome with emotion. And as the bars were torn away, the escapes began, many detainees forced to leap into the crowd as state police moved in. Escapees were given clothes as they were smuggled out in the crowd, some quickly captured as police and security reinforcements arrived. The protest campsite remained sealed off overnight as the hunt for escapees continued. Inside the detention centre, 16 guards were hurt as they used tear gas to subdue rioting inmates. Today, checkpoints were still in place as authorities condemned the protesters' actions.
They were clearly premeditated. They were designed to create havoc within the detention centre, and the results are there to be seen.
Their actions have been clearly dangerous and violent and have directly resulted in disruptions within the centre.
Late this afternoon, protesters again breached the detention centre's perimeter, this time pushing over the front gate. Authorities are now deciding whether they should be removed from the area completely and by force if necessary. Jeremy Pudney, 10 News.
And detainees still free as Woomera protesters again scuffle with police. Running, protesters have entered the prohibited area around the Woomera Detention Centre and confronted police. 14 detainees are still at large after escaping 2 nights ago. 36 have been recaptured. Many protesters are now preparing to head home, apparently satisfied with their efforts. However, federal political leaders are far from happy.
Today's march began in similar fashion to the one on Good Friday, which ended with 50 detainees escaping. Hundreds of protesters ventured across the exclusion zone to the centre fence, but this time police were ready and waiting. A number of scuffles resulted in 7 arrests. The crowd then turned their attention to the detainees. After about 20 minutes, it became obvious there was a stalemate. Neither protesters nor detainees were willing to breach the defensive line. Police were just content to hold everyone at bay. Protesters then marched around the centre. Mounted police and officers in riot gear ensured the group didn't get out of control. The water cannons on standby but not needed. After more than 2 hours, the group headed back to their campsite. The Prime Minister today condemned those protesters who broke the law.
It's unlawful. It's counterproductive. If anything, it will strengthen the resolve of the Australian people to support even more the government's policy.
The opposition leader also had little sympathy for the lawbreakers.
I do not believe it helps arrive at a solution.
The Immigration Minister says he appreciates the job police have done, but stood by his view that earlier action might have prevented the escapes.
The police have a responsibility for maintaining civil order, and even though this is Commonwealth property, their remit ran to assist in relation to this situation. There's a proper expectation that they should act.
However, South Australian Premier Mike Rann demanded an apology for the Minister's implied criticism of the police. Around 14 detainees are still missing after escaping on Friday night, many thought to be still hidden in the protesters' camp. David Curnow, ABC News, Woomera.